The idea of this podcast is to guide people on how to be better, empower them, give them hints and tips to protect them, because that's what we need to do in this industry. Don't ignore those niggling feelings at 3 o'clock in the morning that you're going to get screwed. Have a look into it. If you are worried about a particular project, get some advice. The fact that people manipulate situation and people's desperate need for cash against them is wrong. It's been like this for a long, long time. It's time to change. I can figure people out very, very quickly, and I've worked in the industry for a long time. It's not game over, but it makes it a lot more difficult. The next step from final account is you either agree the account they give you or you fight.
Welcome to Taking the Con Out of Construction, the straight-talking show that's changing the industry, one episode at a time. Small mistakes can cost big money, and even more in time. But a small investment in listening to this episode could help you avoid disputes, delays, and costly pitfalls, while giving you the know-how to stop problems before they start. Let's turn complexity into clarity and take the con out of construction.
Welcome back to Taking the Con Out of Construction. This episode is all about the final account process, that all-important stage where everything gets tied up and the true success of a project becomes clear. Michelle, final accounts can be one of the most stressful parts of any job, but also one of the most rewarding when handled properly. I'm really looking forward to understanding how to approach them with confidence and clarity.
Final accounts are important. So let me just explain what a final account is. Depending obviously of the contract, there are different terms at different timescales, but final account is basically agreeing the final payment. It's not difficult when you've got 1 month's worth of work. So I've got clients that will have one valuation because they only do a month's worth of work, and they might come in, they might be like a specialist decorator or maybe joinery or whatever it may be. But for companies like dry liners, fire stoppers, or M&E contractors, flooring contractors, they're generally on bigger projects. They'll be working on a project a few months, can even be years. So final account is important because it's your last chance saloon. And so it's about agreeing what the final amount is going to be. So what the total contract value is. So as we've discussed, and anyone that's done anything in construction knows, it's very, very rare that what is supposed to be done and what you order is done and what agreed at contract stage is actually done. There's always variations and changes, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. What happens is through the process, you will have different payment terms, and that's negotiable at the contract stage. So payment terms are always negotiable. People will tell you they won't, but they are. They're always negotiable. Whatever you've negotiated now, it may be some people are using deposits more recently. There's a lot of people expecting deposits because of the financial climate and how companies are going pop every 5 minutes. So depending on your payment terms, likelihood is you're going to have monthly valuations. What happens with the final account is it's very, very different, because throughout the evaluation period, it's about this is how much we think has been done. And the QS as a contractor will say, I don't think that's been done, or this has been done. And a lot of the time it's on percentages. So I've done 70% of this or 80% of that. And to some extent, it's a bit of guesswork. Is that reasonable? And when I've done a valuation on either side, it's walking around and thinking, oh, well, you can make it scientific. If it's easy numbers, you've got 10 floors and 1 floor is complete, it's 10%. But then if you've also got materials, the second floor, it could be 15%, but whatever, it doesn't matter specific how you do it. Now, the other thing that's important to pay attention to with final accounts is the variation account is the most difficult. If you've got 10 floors to do, you've got 10 doors to install, you've installed 10 doors, your final account's very easy. You've done what you were paid to do. It's just providing that it's been done to the right quality, to the right standard, you've issued the right documentation, and you've done everything you're supposed to do in accordance with the contract. It's on time and other bits and pieces like that. So that's very, very simple. But it isn't like that in the real world, and there's often variations for various different reasons. What I always do with my clients and anybody that I'm mentoring or tutoring or supporting in any which way is get them to be agreeing the final account and to some extent closing, because it is a deal and it's down to a negotiation. Always be doing that. Now, as a contractor's QS, I have a responsibility to act in a certain way. I'm chartered. And even if I wasn't chartered, ethically, you need to act in a certain way. So if a contractor sent me a variation account, for example, and let's just say I was an M&E contractor and there was a change in the specification of a light. And because of that particular light had a transformer. And because of the size of the transformer, there was a change in the way that we had to install the system, like the cabling or whatever, that something was changed. Now, I know I've seen that particular light fitting has been instructed. I've seen that that's been changed by interior designers, architects, whoever it's been. I know that's a client instruction. I've seen the fact that the work on site has differed slightly because I've seen it. And this could be a £50 variation. Unlikely for me to have this much thought in it, but you're talking tens of thousands on big projects. So this could be a 10, 15, £20,000 variation for all I know. Now, I would have a look at that variation. And if I didn't have enough information to make an accurate decision on whether or not that was reasonable and whether the cost was accurate within rates, whatever it may be, bearing in mind at any month that you're doing an application for some companies, I could be doing applications for 20 different trades and I've got 7 days to do it. Because you've got such a short time frame with an interim valuation, you get the opportunity of payment on account. So an interim valuation is never final until the final account. So whatever you've agreed at any point is not there until final. Now, this is not concrete, should we say, until final account stage. It can be amended at any point. Where this becomes dangerous is there are main contractors out there. There are also subcontractors that do sub out that will do payment on account, payment on account, payment on account, payment account. So you think it's agreed all the way through, and at final account stage, they're like, no, and they will drop your final account by, could be 20%, 40%, 50%. That's a problem because you already paid your labor, you've paid your materials, you pay for everything. At final account stage, this is where the profits sort of come in because everything has been paid out at this point. All of your team have been paid, all your materials, majority of your materials are paid. And this is where the risk is with the contractor or the risk is with the main contractor, depending on who's doing the negotiations. So the person asking for the money is at the highest risk because the project is complete. So there's no leeway, there's no negotiation that you're not going to complete the project. It is complete. You've got no leg to stand on. So this is where it becomes risky. What has happened in the past, in my experience, I could tell you of 15 or 20 people that when I've come to them, they said, oh, I could have done with you last year, last month, last week. I agreed final account. I was owed 120,000. They offered me 80. They would pay me today and I needed the cash so badly. I took it, even though I was entitled to the 120 and probably more. And this happens all the time. Now, there are case laws about things changing and the fact that you can do an adjudication for an interim valuation and it's the last valuation, but because it isn't a final account, it can then be re-adjudicated. There's a lot of bits that can be done and there's a lot of case law and there's a lot of experts out there that will give you much better advice than me. But what you need to be aware of and what I would always say is, in every single contract I've written, although none of the contracts I have personally written myself in 25 years have gone to dispute, not any of them, every single contract I work on, and especially the ones I haven't written, I always look as if they're going to go to dispute. So I always think, how would an adjudicator view this? How would the court interpret this? Am I being fair? Am I being reasonable? What's the deal? And what I would do is make sure that I have a paper trail. And that could be literally on the side of evaluation saying payment on account awaiting or whatever, or payment on account, please see email, or payment on account, and explaining why. So back to the example with the M&E contractor that's had a light change that's got different circumstances and it is a variation, there's additional costs. If that contractor hadn't given me enough information or I didn't have the time to review that information to value it properly, I would do a payment on account and think, well, okay, they've installed it, maybe they've installed 50% of it. If I had in my head when it was instructed that it was going to be 5,000 and they've done 50% of it or 90% of it or something, I would value it 5,000. Now, if I've had a look at some of the information that's come through and it looks like it could be a bit more, I might value that a little bit more. It also depends on where you're at in the contract. But if you're talking first fixed stage, we've still got months to go. So I've got other interim applications to adjust that and works is still going ahead. So it's minimal risk. I mean, if it was a £250,000 valuation on a £100,000 contract, that's a whole different ball game. But you just take a bit of sense and sensibility with it. So I would then say payment on account because I need XYZ information or pending review or whatever it may be. Because in the majority of contracts, the onus and the burden of proof of who needs to explain the value and warrant that value of that payment is the person applying for the payment. That is where the responsibility lies. If they haven't given me ample information that's reasonable in order for me to assess the value of that variation, then they need to substantiate it. But the other thing that people forget when you're a subcontractor or a subcontractor is if there's a variation and I'm the main contractor, I need to apply to that. So yes, you can vary it to me, but unless I've got enough information that I can then ask the client for that variation, because it's a variation to me too, then it makes it highly risky. If I can't just, oh, that's fine, I'm just going to pay you money. But if I can't substantiate it to get the money back, then obviously as a main contractor, I'm at a loss, and that's a dangerous place to be. This is the other thing, or it may be the fact that Another scenario, the same situation, the subcontractor has asked for a variation. I've already put in something saying this is a variation potentially to the client. The client might have raised some things. Well, actually, it wasn't this. It should have been this. It should have been something else. So there could be a situation where it might not be a full variation. The other thing is it's really, really common. People will put an add cost in, and I'm like, you need to deduct the previous light fitting, or what had you allowed for first. Like, that is also the other thing that people forget. They're very, very quick to add the additional cost, and I'm like, but there was an allowance in for that, so you need to take that allowance out, or you're adding the extra over cost rather than just this is a new price. But this happens a lot with final accounts. What I tend to do as a contractor's QS or developer's QS, so on the paying side of the contract, is make sure that I've documented. Now, I also will use an interim application for payment to get what I want. Because if I've had 3 months and we're on a 6 months, 9 months, 12-month contract, and for 3 months I've been asking for the same information and I've been ignored, then if they're not substantiating it, I will strike it out. It will no longer be a payment account. It's like, this has now been removed. And bear in mind, they've paid that already because it's not substantiated. You can't substantiate it. So that's it. It's either removed as a variation completely, or it's valued at a reduced rate of whatever it may be. And I will change the percentage that's done to 100% or whatever it is. So say, for example, the valuation amount was 20,000 and they've claimed 50% of it or even 100% of it. I will say, right, that value is now 10,000 because that's how I valued it from the information that I have available. And you've done 100%. So all of a sudden you've got 100% of 10,000, or if it was 50%, it would then be 50% of 10,000 instead of 50% of 20,000. And that tends to get people's attention. They need to understand that I don't want to do that. And I could easily do that at final account stage. Of course I could, but I don't feel that's reasonable. And when you start doing things like that, that's when people get their backup. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what anybody says. We're human beings. And emotions are involved, especially when it's your business, and especially when you're in a vulnerable position. So final accounts is where contractors or whoever's asking for the money is their most vulnerable, and how they change is quite remarkable in how the negotiations can happen. My advice, obviously, when dealing with final accounts is, first of all, always be closing, always be thinking of your final account and get these things agreed, but also meet up with your contractors or your QS. Have conversations. I don't mean every month, because that's not necessary, but you do need to make sure that you've got reasonable backup, but also not everybody on the paying side takes responsibility as seriously as I always have. I get that. But ultimately, I've always worked in a way that if I went to adjudication, I've got the information there. It's very, very quickly to issue it. If I was ever questioned, why did I do this? I've got the information. There's a paper trail. So keeping records is really, really crucial, and getting things signed off, and also getting agreements beforehand and get something in writing. And if you have a conversation, you agree something and they have approved and they've paid that money, send them an email saying, great to meet up with you, just confirming that this is approved, that is approved. So you're protecting yourself. So at the end of final account, when you're at your vulnerable stage, they can't go around and just suddenly toss everything out because they feel like it. This is one of the biggest cons in the construction industry. The fact that people manipulate situation and people's desperate need for cash against them, and it's wrong. And this is one of the fundamental things that's wrong with my profession, is how people do that. Especially main contractors have a tendency to subby bash. Like, it has its own term. It's been around the entire time I've been in the construction industry. What you need to understand at final account stage, especially with the bigger, longer term providers, everybody's rushing around. The budget is run out. Any contingencies that people had have probably been used, and it's getting to the point of make and break, and everyone's scrapping to get a little bit of profit or as much profit as they can. Mistakes have been made and it all comes showing at the end of it, and this is where it all becomes a bit difficult. Changes end up happening and people start running out of money. This is where it gets quite desperate, especially if you're one of those companies that has to wait to the end. Yes, there's things like retention, which is frustrating as well, but it's a need and a must in some circumstances. And to those out there agreeing final accounts, it's totally wrong. You need to stop doing it. Manage your job properly, and you won't need to bash anyone, because ultimately it's the subbies that are delivering the work. But then on the other hand, subcontractors, if you haven't delivered, if you've been late, if you've been shoddy, if the main contractors had to chase you and the main contractors had to fill gaps and your main contractors had to push you along, you've been painful and you haven't turned up, and we're going to be there on Monday, you're not there on Monday, we're going to be there on Wednesday and you're not there on Wednesday. If you haven't delivered on time, in budget, and a good service, then you don't expect to get paid the full amount of an account. You need to offer a discount. But I'm talking to the contractors who do deliver, that do jump through hoops, that do say what they're going to do, that are on time, that do a great service, that do a great product. Make sure that you're getting everything agreed as you move forward. Because if you don't, you're exposing yourself at the end. And if you were to go to adjudication on a final account or even an interim payment and express that these things have been approved previously, the courts do not like the fact that people turn around and use final account as a weapon, because that's not what it's supposed to be. That's just the basic about final account. So here's a few specifics that I want to go through. Now, depending on your contract, what also makes things different about the final account stage is the payment terms change as soon as you hit final account. So once you've got practical completion, however that deems to be in your contract, whatever the definition of practical completion is, once you hit practical completion, you're then in final account stage. Again, you have to check your contracts. But what happens quite frequently in a lot of the JCT contracts is you'll have interim payments on a monthly basis. And then once you hit final account, they'll go to 2 monthly. And then you'll have either 6 months or 12 months, depending on the contract and the terms and conditions of what's been approved, to have that opportunity to negotiate the final account. So it gives you time to get any information. Now, the other thing you need to be aware of is it's not allowed for a contractor to drag out that process without due pause. And they have to issue payment certificates in that process or negotiation. Final account is not final until it's signed by both parties. That you have to be careful of. And also you can't just dilly-dally along, because you can still get adjudicated in a final account in that period. But what I try to do as a contractor's QS, as a developer's QS, as a main contractor's QS, I like to get all of my final accounts agreed way before final account. And it's literally a handful of things. I've had a few big accounts with some big contractors. I've had a few difficult conversations over the last 25 years. I've had a few projects that were in absolute turmoil when I turned up, and I've had to fix them. And that's often because the client wasn't quite where they should have been. The architect wasn't doing what they were supposed to be. The instructions weren't doing what they're supposed to be. The interior design wasn't issued in time. The design might not have worked. Things weren't employed properly, or someone declares war, or we have COVID, or whatever it may be. There's all these things that have affected it. But there have been lots of situations where the client hasn't been squeaky clean, and nor is the contractor. They are slightly easier to deal with because it's a bit of a 50-50, depending on who I'm working for. But ultimately, as a QS, especially in my consultancy role, I have to do what's right for the contract. People assume because I'm working for a client who's paying my bill that I have to work on their best interest. It's not. It's what's in accordance with the contract. And that generally is in the best of my client's interest. So it's not the fact that my clients run out of money and therefore I just can't pay anyone because my clients run out of money. That's not anybody else's fault except my client. They need to find the money, or they shouldn't have instructed the work. There's that aspect of it. And obviously there's a lot to do with attitudes and a lot to do with how people jump through hoops. And there's a lot wrong with it just being the way it is in construction. But there are things that you can do, and everybody has to take the responsibility. And I've spoken about this hundreds and hundreds of times about doing due diligence and doing what needs to be done. If you don't know what you're doing, find out, learn, take a course, employ someone that does, get a construction consultant, a specialist, get somebody to help you. Even if you've got someone that you pay a fee to on a monthly basis just to be on the end of the phone, get the support that you need. Or use AI, for goodness sake, not necessarily to compile a final account, but upload a contract and ask them what are the terms of the contract. If you don't understand it, ask AI to summarize the payment terms. Ask AI to summarize final account payment terms if necessary. Obviously, if you're doing that, check it. I've often done that because the clause is slightly different. If I'm writing in a formal letter, I need to quote the clause number. Often I will upload the contract and the amendments, because the amendments are very important, because that's what makes it particular. I will upload that into AI and say, find me the clause on payment or the exact terminology. It will then tell me the clause number. Once I've got the clause number, it's really easy to scan through that 150-page document, or even ask AI what page number it is on. And then I double check that clause myself, but it saves me drafting through pages and pages of a contract, and I zone in, then I double check it. I've done a number of talks on AI recently, and I talk about using AI as one of your junior assistants. If you were getting a junior assistant to write a contract or to write a proposal to your potential biggest client, you're not going to send it out before checking, and AI is no different. So whatever you need to do to find out what you're doing, to understand where you're at with the contract and what your terms and conditions are and what You need to do what you need to provide. If you don't want to employ someone, use a tool of some sort and figure it out, because just not knowing and fumbling through is just not good business. So the idea of a final account is there are timeframes because it can't drag on forever, but also you need to make sure that you're providing the information, because if you're asking for the money, the onus is on you to prove it. And a lot of people don't understand that. You'll also have people that don't want to pay and they'll drag it out for whatever reason. And that's not right either. But I do think that preparation is key, and keeping records, but also making sure that you're valuing things properly. If you priced your job properly in the first place, you've priced your variations properly in the first place, every time you've had one, you've issued the information that you're supposed to, it's highly unlikely that whoever you're applying to is going to have any means not to pay you. And this is what I encourage my clients to do. With an interim valuation for payment, make it easy. Final account is exactly the same. But it's more important at final account because this is your last shot. And just because you haven't applied for something in an interim payment doesn't mean that you can't apply for it in final account. That's the whole idea of final account. It's scooping up everything, every change, every variation. And obviously, depending on your contract, whether it's got a remeasure, then that's a whole different ballgame. But I'm talking about general final accounts with contract sums, fixed price contract sum, which a lot of people think is a fixed price and that it can't change, but that's just not true. It's fixed price, but it can be changed by variations, which can be as order admits. If all of a sudden you've been working on a project for 12 or 18 months and a month before you're due to finish your contract, you start looking at your final account, yeah, that's a really scary place to be. Because you need to try and remember what happened 12 months ago, 18 months ago. I can't remember what I did yesterday half of the time, let alone what I did 18 months ago. Makes it really, really difficult. And as much as you think, oh, I'll remember this, you'll remember parts of it and you won't necessarily remember all of it. I've had times I'm scrabbling through a notebook because I remember writing down something and I'm tearing around trying to find this notebook or this email, and I'm looking, and then I finally find it and I see the page and I remember the page that I've had in my head, but the page isn't clear enough for me to read it and it's nothing like what I thought it was. And what you also need to understand is if your records aren't accurate, their records may be. And a final account is a negotiation. It doesn't have to be that way, but ultimately it's what they see and their view and their interpretation of the contract, the drawing, the variations, the progress, how you've managed it, the entire success or failure of the project. It's their opinion of that compared to my opinion, your opinion, whoever. A successful final account starts at contract negotiation stage. I'm always encouraging people to be thinking about final account all the time, because the more that you do, the better your applications for payment are, and the more concise they are. Ultimately, if you get to an issue and final account stage, and whoever you are, whatever line you are in the contract or whatever level you're at, if you're reading a final account and you're looking for that information and you're looking for that money, it's very easy to find if every single one of your applications has been done properly. So the reason we're talking about final account now is because I would hope the people listening to this have listened to every single one of our podcasts today. And if you haven't, go check them out, because worrying about final account stage now is an issue if you're at final account stage, if you haven't done all the other processes before. And obviously the idea of this podcast is to guide people how to be better, empower them, give them hints and tips to protect them, because that's what we need to do in this industry. I think we need it everywhere in today's era, the way that people are and how people act, etc. But in construction, for definite, it's been like this for a long, long time. It's time to change. That's the thing with final accounts. They're a work in progress all the way through. Nothing is final till the final account. Leaving negotiations to the last minute puts you at substantial risk. But it all depends on who you're negotiating with. If you're a subcontractor, I'm sure you've got many stories that you'll never forget of where you were owed that money and it was genuine. And a lot of times, what's really sad about people not getting paid what they're entitled to in their final account is normally, if I'd got hands on their final account before they submitted it, I probably would have added another 20% because that's what they would have been entitled to. So obviously we've spoke about variations before. If you're not pricing variations properly, if you're not doing extensions of times and not an expense properly, if you're one of those contractors that just wants to get out and you've got money in the bank and you've managed to pay your bills and you just want your last bit, that's great. But you are often entitled to more. Not all the time, obviously, and you've got the opposites. You've got the con artist side of subcontractors too. There's many of them as well. It's 50-50 in my experience. But you also need to have a bit of intuition. And I know when I'm going to have trouble negotiating a final account months before. we've got that. And I normally know if I'm going to have a problem agreeing a final account before I'm in contract, because I make sure that I've got certain things to protect me within that contract. And I also know that I can figure people out very, very quickly. And I've worked in the industry for a long time, and my experience is so varied. There's very few scenarios I've not been in. There's very few types of people that I've not met. There's very few things that I don't know about the industry. So I have a bit of a superpower of figuring things and people out really, really quickly. Final account negotiation is about managing people to some extent. It's managing the expectations, it's managing the process, it's building a relationship with whoever you're negotiating with. And emotions shouldn't come involved, but it does. So if you've been that contractor or subcontractor that has been a godsend, that has turned up when they're supposed to do, that has bent over backwards, that has delivered information, has made the process easier, has sent the goddamn tender document back completed as the QS has sent it, to send an interim valuation on the format that the QS has asked for. If you are one of these angel contractors, it's going to make your final account easier. If you've been pushed and chased and sent your applications in late in a ridiculous format that the guys had to struggle with, chasing payments before they're due, have been pretty aggressive the whole way through and an absolute pain in the backside, you're going to have a difficult final account, because ultimately you've been a pain in the ass. If you haven't delivered and you're late, do you deserve to have a full final account when the contractor or whoever else all suffered? Do you deserve to make the full amount of money? I don't think you do. And unless you've got someone really, really good on your side to prove all of that, then you're going to expect to take a hit. But also, you need to be a bit savvy about you, and you need to figure out who is legitimate and who isn't, and have an idea of who you're dealing with and work in the way that suits them. But also, if you feel like you are working with someone that's going to screw you and you've got that sixth sense, you've got that feeling in your gut, don't wait to find an account to find out. Get some advice, even if it's a power hour with someone for 500 quid. It might seem ridiculous and a lot of money, but if that's an expert and knows what they're doing and can advise you on how to protect yourself and build your foreign account up, and make sure you've got all the information that as and when they start playing silly buggers, you've turned around and go, here, there's a file, and you've got all your documentation is right there. Because you know for what, if you can issue that information that quickly, you can go to adjudication that quickly. And as much as there is a lot to be said about adjudication, it is rough justice, I get that, but it's rough because it's quick. But if you've got all your ducks in a row 24/7 and you are ready and waiting for whatever that last signal is to go, right, that's it, we're going for it because we're going to get screwed. If you've got that information to hand and you go and speak to someone, that process is not so painful for you. And also if you win, because they haven't done their application, their certificate or whatever it may be in time, you end up in dispute, the more information that you have and the more information that you can prove to the adjudicator and then potentially the courts if it goes that far, the more information you can prove to them. And the fact that you interrogate, well, you can't say you didn't know about this because we sent you this, you heard about this, that, you agreed to it here, you did this, you did that. It just protects your case. And yes, it might be an extra hour a week keeping records, but ultimately, trust me, going back and just getting a few months worth of records or a Excel spreadsheet with times, or it could be a handwritten sheet and a document, whatever it is, if you can get records that you keep and you get them quickly, because when you're trying to go to adjudication and you've got 2 weeks to answer and you haven't filed anything and nothing's prepared and you're trying to find that magic email that you've never actually sent, that's stressful, it's painful. And also when you're in that situation, it's expensive. Because if you go to a consultant and you're desperate and you need something done quickly, that can be expensive because they've got to drop everything. And it's not about taking advantage, it's about the value of the service, because the proverbial has hit the fan. And this can be make or break. And that's the problem with foreign accounts, is the scariest part they're in, because it can make or break not just the project, but an entire business. And even if you're being paranoid, speak to someone. There's no harm in asking for a little bit of advice. There's no harm in getting someone that's a consultant to come in and speak to your team. There's no harm in doing a bit of training. Get a fractional commercial director. You don't have to necessarily employ someone for 250 grand a year to get that advice. Go fractional, pay for hourly. If you're worried about something, and generally I always tell people not to go against their gut. If you are worried about a contract contract and you're worried about your final account, you're worried about getting screwed, get help as soon as you have that first inkling. And it may be that you're wrong, you may be being paranoid, but ultimately having a good contract that protects you changes your mental way of seeing things. Sometimes people panic, like if you're married and you had a prenup, for example, would you then be worried about working so many hours and building up a business because all of a sudden she's gone out shopping and she's come home late? You paranoid that maybe she's having an affair or he's having an affair, and suddenly you're panicking about how you're going to be left when all they've done is work late or miss their train. But when you're protected and you know that you're protected, you change things and you're a bit more lenient, and you might let things slide or you'll carry on going. But when you get into this mental state and you're scared and you're fearful of losing everything, losing your business, losing your hard-earned cash, having difficult times when you don't deserve it, it does change the perspective. And it depends on the person, obviously. Me personally, I like to be prepared and I like to be protected. So I know with any of my clients that I've got good records, that I have worked on their behalf. They've got a good contract. If they don't have a good contract, they know how to maintain it and they manage it. They know how to issue what they need to issue. They know how to file things. They know what certificates need to be done when and where. They have the information. They do applications for payments properly. They cover their backside and say, right, here's a picture of the materials on site. And they haven't paid that for you. It just goes to show the type of person that they are, because adjudicators know what people are about and what people are in the industry. They see the worst of the worst. So if you're protecting yourself and go, right, well, actually, we did this and it was struck out. We did this and it was struck out. And we did this and it was struck out. You're building a picture. So the better picture that you have and the more information you have, the more secure you're going to feel. And also, when you walk into a meeting, knowing you've got all this information and you've got this backup and you can literally pull out whatever it needs to be, you just go into the meeting with a whole different confidence and a whole different level of expectation. And this is what I'm doing a lot with my clients now. It's about getting them into that mindset and into that mastery. You are the master of your trade and you're good at what you do. You're just going to be paid for it. And ultimately, if you've got someone that's going to try and screw you over, and better luck next time, sometimes the pie isn't big enough for everyone to have a big enough slice. But I make sure that my clients get paid. And unfortunately, sometimes that means others don't. Don't be scared to employ a professional, especially if you think there's an issue, because a decent QS will save you 10 times what they cost most of the time. But get the advice you need. Don't ignore those niggling feelings at 3 o'clock in the morning that you're going to get screwed. Have a look into it. And if you are worried about a particular project, get some advice, get some external advice, even if it's just an hour. You don't have to employ someone long term, an hour of someone's time. Get someone on retainer, get someone in to look at your systems and processes, train your people. The final account is nothing about that last final negotiation. You should be looking at final account at the very, very beginning when you tender, because once it comes to the end, you haven't done what you need to do at the beginning. It's not game over, but it makes it a lot more difficult, because the next step from final account is you either agree the account they give you or you fight. And when you're fighting, that's when you end up in alternative dispute resolution, which is a whole different subject. And we're going to speak about that next week. Now, if you've listened to all of my podcasts, you should have an understanding of what you should be doing in business, because every single day I'm working with my clients is about preventing a dispute.
Final account marks the finish line of any project, but as Michelle's explained today, how you get there says everything about your processes and your professionalism. From accurate records to open communication, it's all about wrapping things up in the right way. Michelle, thank you for sharing such a thoughtful and comprehensive look at this stage of the construction journey. Next time, alternative dispute resolution, a topic that can make or break professional relationships.
If you found value in today's episode, hit subscribe so you never miss a new release, and share it with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. To learn more, access resources, or find out how Michelle Carr and Construction Alchemy can help you protect your projects, solve problems, and boost your profits, visit constructionalchemy.co.uk. Together, we can change the industry, one project, one company, and one episode at a time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based on the personal experiences of Michelle Carr and her guests. They are for general information only and should not be relied upon as professional or legal advice. Always seek your own independent advice before making decisions. Neither Michelle Carr nor Construction Alchemy accepts liability for any loss, damage, or consequences arising from actions taken based on this podcast. Thank you for listening.